Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Alpha. I'm in Thailand. I'm having a good lunch. Everyone's so busy. So busy. So, see this hat? U.S. Air Force 47. What does that mean? 1947 is when we had the National Security Act that changed our country, turned it into a fascist dictatorship, turned it into Nazis. And we, if you read, the Mein Kampf. No, Adolf Hitler didn't write it. By that time, he was a total drug addict, mind controlled. Pinocchio. Pretty much anybody who goes for power becomes Pinocchio. Lies all the time, nose gets pointed. The one you can see the spike. And you can see the strength on Joe Biden. You can see it on all the members of Congress, all the members of the Senate. They'll say one thing one day, but the same amount of conviction. So, justice. What is justice? It's just for us. Just for us rich. Just for us in control. Just for us elite. That's what justice is. Just us. Right? And here's a little, while I eat my lunch, something you can listen to from alternative radio, right? .org, right? Alternativeradio.org. And this is Chris Hedges. Right? Listen to this one.
The UN Security Council, where it is likely to be vetoed by Washington. Meanwhile, in Gaza, where no place is safe, the bloodbath continues. The number of Palestinians killed, wounded, and missing is soaring. Internationally, Washington is more and more isolated. Biden's ironclad backing of Israel is coming under increasing scrutiny and opposition. The U.S., critics say, is enabling genocide. Our guest today is Chris Hedges. He's an award-winning independent journalist who has covered the Middle East for many years. Noam Chomsky says, Chris Hedges has compiled a remarkable record of reporting and analysis. He has been an incomparable source of insight and understanding, both in his outstanding career as a courageous journalist and in his penetrating commentary on world events. Chris Hedges is the host of the Chris Hedges Report and the author of many books. His latest is The Greatest Evil is War. He spoke at the Islamic Society for Central New Jersey in Monmouth Junction on January 18th. And now, Chris Hedges.
Israel's master plan for Gaza is clear. Destroy infrastructure, medical facilities, and sanitation, including access to clean water, block shipments of food and fuel, impose telecommunications blackouts, unleash indiscriminate industrial violence to kill and wound hundreds a day, let starvation and epidemics of infectious diseases, along with the daily massacres and the displacement of Palestinians from their homes, turn Gaza into a mortuary. Israel has killed or seriously wounded close to 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza, almost one in every 20 inhabitants. It has destroyed or damaged 60% of the housing famine is imminent. The 335,000 children under the age of 5 are at high risk of malnutrition. Some 50,000 pregnant women lack health care and adequate nutrition. Infants are dying in droves. Israeli political and military officials of the South African jurists documented at the International Court of Justice make no secret of their genocidal intent, nor of their vision of what comes next. In September, before the incursion into Israel by Hamas and other resistance fighters, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu displayed a map of what he called the new Middle East at a UN General Assembly meeting. Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem had all been incorporated into a greater Israel. Palestine had ceased to exist. The Palestinians are being forced to choose between death from bombs, disease, exposure, or starvation, or being driven from their homeland. There will soon reach a point where death will be so ubiquitous that deportation for those who want to live will be the only option. Israel is lobbying countries in Latin America and Africa to accept Palestinian refugees. Israeli leaders are calling this deportation, quote, voluntary migration. This is the plan. No one, especially the Biden administration, intends to stop it. The most disturbing lesson I learned while covering armed conflicts for 2 decades is that we all have the capacity, with a little prodding, to become willing executioners. The line between the victim and the victimizer is razor thin. The dark lust of racial, ethnic supremacy, of vengeance and hate, of the eradication of those we condemn as embodying evil, are poisons that are not circumscribed by race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion. We can all become Nazis. It takes very little. And if we do not stand in eternal vigilance over evil, our evil, we become monsters. Perhaps the saddest irony is that a people once in need of protection from genocide now commit it. The cries of those expiring under the rubble in Gaza are the cries of the boys and men executed by the Bosnian Serbs at Srebrenica, the over 1.5 million Cambodians killed by the Khmer Rouge, the thousands of Tutsi families burned alive in churches, and the tens of thousands of Jews executed by the Einsatzgruppen at Baba Yar in Ukraine. The genocide carried out during the Holocaust is not an historical relic. It lives, lurking in the shadows, waiting to ignite its vicious contagion. But this truth is bitter and hard to confront. We prefer the myth. We prefer to see in our own kind, our own race, our own ethnicity, our own nation, our own religion, superior virtues. We prefer to sanctify our hatred. The German playwright and revolutionary Ernst Toller, unable to rouse an indifferent world to assist victims and refugees from the Spanish Civil War, hanged himself in 1939 in a room at the Mayflower Hotel in New York City. On his hotel desk were photos of dead Spanish children. Most people have no imagination, he wrote. If they could imagine the sufferings of others, they would not make them suffer so. What separated a German mother from a French mother? Slogans which deafened us so that we could not hear the truth. Primo Levi, who survived the death camps, railed against the false morally uplifting narrative of the Holocaust that culminates in the creation of the State of Israel, a narrative embraced by the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. The contemporary history of the Third Reich, he writes, could be reread as a war against memory, an Orwellian falsification of memory, falsification of reality, negation of reality. He wonders if we who have returned have been able to understand and make others understand our experience. We all inhabit a morally gray zone. We all can be induced to become part of the apparatus of death, often for trivial reasons and paltry rewards. This is the terrifying truth of the Holocaust, and the Israelis are no exception. 1 month into the genocide, according to a poll in Time magazine, 57% of Israelis believed Israel was not using enough force in Gaza. These Israelis saw the same images you and I see: the children with amputated limbs, the chalky, lifeless bodies lifted out from under the rubble, the long trenches filled with corpses wrapped in white shrouds, the screams of the wounded in the hospital corridors. Only 2% of Israelis said Israel was using too much force. The South African lawyers at The Hague, who compared Israel's crimes with those carried out by the apartheid regime in South Africa, showed the court a video of Israeli soldiers celebrating and calling for the death of Palestinians. They sang as they danced, "There are no uninvolved civilians," as evidence that genocidal intent descends from the top to the bottom of the Israeli war machine and political system. Racism, an attribute of all colonial settler societies, whether the British colonists in India and Kenya or the French in Algeria, pervades Israeli society. Palestinians are seen as vermin, to be controlled or exterminated. It is very hard not to be cynical about the plethora of university courses about the Holocaust, given the censorship and banning of groups such as Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace. What is the point of studying the Holocaust if you do not understand its fundamental lesson? When you have the capacity to stop genocide and you do not, you are culpable. It is hard not to be cynical about the humanitarian interventionists, Barack Obama, Tony Blair, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Samantha Power, who talk in sanctimonious rhymes about the responsibility to protect, but are silent about war crimes when speaking out would threaten their status and careers. None of the humanitarian interventions they championed, Bosnia, Darfur, Libya, came close to replicating the suffering and slaughter in Gaza. But there is a cost to defending Palestinians, a cost they do not intend to pay. The moral universe has now been turned upside down. Those of us who oppose genocide are accused of advocating it. Those who carry out genocide are said to have the right to defend themselves, vetoing ceasefires and providing 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that throw out metal fragments for thousands of feet in densely packed refugee camps is the road to peace. Bombing hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, ambulances, and refugee camps, obliterating families, are routine acts of war. Carrying out genocide in Gaza is a way to de-radicalize Palestinians. Attacking Houthi bases in Yemen will de-escalate a regional conflict. And remember, none of this makes sense, as protesters around the world realize. If the genocide in Gaza is not halted, it will presage a new world order, A world where the old rules, more honored in the breach than the observance, no longer matter. It will be a world where nations with vast bureaucratic structures and technologically advanced military systems carry out in public view massive killing projects. The industrialized nations, weakened, fearful of global chaos, are sending an ominous message to the global south and anyone who might think of revolt. We will kill you without restraint, and no one will stop us. One day, you will all be Palestinians. I fear that we live in a world in which war and racism are ubiquitous, in which the powers of government mobilization and legitimization are powerful and increasing, in which a sense of personal responsibility is increasingly attenuated by specialization and bureaucratization, in which the peer group exerts tremendous pressure on behavior and sets moral norms. Christopher Browning writes in Ordinary Men about a German reserve police battalion in World War II that was ultimately responsible for the murder of 83,000 Jews. In such a world, I fear, modern governments that wish to commit mass murder will seldom fail in their efforts for being unable to induce ordinary men to become their willing executioners. Evil is protean, it mutates, it finds new forms and expressions, it changes its face, but not its essence. Germany orchestrated the murder of 6 million Jews, as well as over 6 million gypsies, Poles, homosexuals, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Freemason, artists, journalists, Soviet prisoners of war, people with physical and intellectual disabilities, and political opponents. It immediately set out after the war to expiate itself for its crimes. It definitely transferred its racism and demonization to Muslims, with racial supremacy remaining firmly rooted in the German psyche. At the same time, Germany and the US rehabilitated thousands of former Nazis, especially from the intelligence services and the scientific community, and did little to prosecute those who directed Nazi war crimes. Germany today is Israel's second largest arms supplier following the US. The supposed campaign in the US and Germany against anti-Semitism, interpreted as any statement that is critical of the state of Israel or denounces the genocide, is the latest subterfuge to champion white power. It is why Germany and the US, which have effectively criminalized support for Palestinians, and the most retrograde white supremacists, including philo-Semites such as John Hagee or Marjorie Taylor Greene, fervently back Israel. The Israeli historian Ilan Pappé writes that Germany's unequivocal support for Israel is a form of blackmail. The argument for a Jewish state as compensation for the Holocaust was a powerful argument, so powerful that nobody listened to the outright rejection of the UN solution by the overwhelming majority of the people of Palestine, Pape writes. What comes out clearly is a European wish to atone. The basic and natural rights of the Palestinians should be sidelined, dwarfed, and forgotten altogether for the sake of the forgiveness that Europe was seeking from the newly formed Jewish state. It was much easier to rectify the Nazi evil vis-a-vis a Zionist movement than facing the Jews of the world in general. It was less complex, and more importantly, it did not involve facing the victims of the Holocaust themselves, but rather a state that claimed to represent them. The price for this more convenient atonement was robbing the Palestinians of every basic and natural right they had and allowing.
Well, that's good senses. And you can go read his books. He's quite eloquent. I just wanted to play that to you while I eat my lunch while millions of Palestinians are starving in the Gaza Strip, all under the watchful protection of the U.S. government and the EU and everyone else, to cut off food for millions of people because 12 folks were accused of helping Hamas with October 7th without any real proof. Still we haven't seen any forensic proof of what happened on October 7th. We are not allowed to understand that the IDF and Mossad understood that Hamas was getting ready to do something. And there was an article in the New York Times that stated that the government understood what was going on. But at that time, they were going through a kind of revolution on the streets of Israel that the average public was, don't get rid of our democracy. When the ultra-right Likud and ultra-right of them folk wanted to get rid of the Supreme Court, or at least, hobble it. And and we did nothing. We said nothing. And they couldn't, they beat people up. They sprayed them with skunk juice. If you ever smell that stuff, a bunch of the IDF kids came to Colombia when Colombia was allowing the Jews for peace in Gaza. We're having a teach-in, and they sprayed them down, and the school didn't even believe them. They had to go to a lot of them ended up in the emergency room. In the emergency room, people called the cops, and the cops investigated and said, wow. Then they went to the school, and then the school blamed those kids, not the IDF guys who were there still on campus. So, whenever you are, so why am I doing this? Back in the day, this little book here, I have like a book like this for every year in my life, a lot of years in my life. This is 1984. Right? There's me. There's me in the porch. Right? There's Mary Boone, right? In her first gallery down the Lower East Side. I think it was in Thomas Street. And I knew her because I knew Brooke Alexander. I helped build his gallery on Worcester Street, right? And the guy next, right here, he is from Germany, right? He's Der Spiegel's art critic. So this painting here was a friend of mine. His name was Ralston Farina, and Steve was an amazing guy. He had tremendous talent. He was a filmmaker, writer, painter, sculptor. But when he talked to people, he just got them to hate him. It was unbelievable. And I was the only guy who I was his buddy. So he lived for his art. He was an artist in the first person. The guy who drew the drawing on the cave, that was Steve, right? So anyway, this painting, so he did all this art. He was very prolific in a 3-year period. And then he went to San Francisco to try and, have a freer life. And this is, 80s. So the AIDS epidemic was straight up, right? And basically he got infected with something else. And he died of his central nervous system was, basically poisoned, and he died. And there, he left all his art in my loft, and all his writings and all his everything. And Mary Boone stayed the evening when he looked at that smile. So whenever a woman looks at you with that kind of smile, you know what that means. She means, I'm going to get you when you get home. So anyway, so she was going through Steve's stuff, and everyone knew Steve was brilliant. Everyone knew his place, better than anybody else who was coming up in that period. And so she goes, now, can you finish off Steve's artwork? And then I'll sell it, right? And so here's the painting Steve started. And he got about maybe a quarter done, and I ended up the 3/4. Right, I kicked out about 80 pieces of his art, um, and then I handed off the writings to his stuff to different people, writers I knew in West Bath, right? And so this was, she opened up her gallery because she had a gallery on 57th Street. She came from a super rich family, super connected. She was part of the Astor family. I mean, just look how she smokes her cigarette. She never did not have a cigarette holder, right? So that's Mary Boone smiling at me, going, "Hey, boy, we're going to take this one to the bank." So I made a nice chunk out of that, and I went off to Ireland. And that was, 86, I think, was my last visit with the Oak Room. Here's Louis Tropia. He was an A&R executive, and he was the godfather of punk music. Now, there were other guys who, producers who it was called New Wave, and they had a whole lot of stuff. But it was this, it came from the Velvet Underground was probably like the first punk, and there was a whole group of pop music, especially the women of pop music were punk, right? And, so there's me at almost 40. That's what I look like at almost 40. This is when I was still running around a lot. Didn't have a car. Didn't have a corporate anything. Wasn't the itinerant scholar. I was the artist, the electrician, the healer, the social activist, and I walked everywhere. Music. Now you have to realize it's the 80s. We had wars all over the world. We were still having wars in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War didn't really end until the 80s, right? And then we started up a whole new war. Have Iran and Iraq go at each other, and we basically took over Central and South America, and all of those gangs, that were are in Ecuador and Ethiopia, all the guys in Chile and Brazil and that's all just fervent with Nazi, ultra-right gangs, right? And all the gangs we have in this country are that, right? So you don't realize that. So, and this is back in the day, I was a beta guy because I knew Grandpa Sony, and he said, "Well, you're an artist, make art with this camera." Right? And this is before VHS. I mean, VHS had already taken over, but Beta was still around, and Beta was like as good as it was transmission grade. That's the beauty of Beta. It was something you could put on TV. Well, VHS not so much. You could, but right? They would quite catch up. So here's patron saint of the Lower East Side, Marissa. And she was always, if she wasn't smiling like that, she was like, about to go hysterical, right? I just said something funny because she was really pissed off about what these people, blah, blah, blah. And I said, listen, we can't call these people. This is their neighborhood. We're helping out here. Don't they see what we're doing? Yes, but they're like battered and bruised. And suffering from post-traumatic stress, which was just coming out. People didn't even know what that was. Now here's me. I was teaching meditation, right? And I had these classes, and this is Garrick Beck, and his parents were Judith Molina and Beck. What's his name? His daddy. Anyway, they started a living theater, like the Uber. They were the American version of the avant-garde art. Right? So I was teaching the whole community how to meditate, and I've got so deep. And there I am, right? Sound of music. So that was, everyone was a drug addict. I mean, we had whole buildings full of crackheads, So, uh,
Material. It just looks like a money laundering operation.
Oh, it's really true. Well, the other thing about her, they want a woman in there, and they don't have a really good field of women in the Democratic Party. So, they're trying to see what can we work with, who's been loyal. And, with all the incredible, they've been trying to do a lot of things to pump up her profile. I've noticed that. I've noticed the Gavin Newsom thing. He's, of course, the guy who said he was going to call martial law against his own citizens. Masonic duties into the Theosophical Society and brought forward so much influence on FDR that we're going to see a whole occult puzzle piece fall into place with FDR. But by the time we get to 1945, he has been booted out of the vice presidency. He was going to be there and he was going to be President-X. But instead we got Truman, who would drop the bomb. And this is something that it's pretty clear Wallace was not going to do. So these groups behind the scenes had to move this in just right. And there's going to be a lot that plays out in the first 6 months of this year that'll give us some of those answers. Let's take it back in time. Today's January 20th, 2023. What was going on January 20th of 1941? Some 82 years ago. It was the official inauguration of FDR and Henry Wallace. And both of these men were very, very deep. Roosevelt, including not only the Masons and the Oddfellows, which is a very interesting kind of spin-off of the Masons and unusual for a lot of reasons. Very heavy emphasis on youth. But also, when we look at Henry Wallace, we are looking at the X piece coming in, a direct major theosophist, but somebody who was such a core member that they were part of the Halcyon Temple, which is the theosophical group that broke away from the Besant Theosophical Society and really started their own thing in California. This is an important group. I highlighted them in an episode. This has been a couple of years now. But the whole story of the Halcyon Temple is in a wonderful book called Radiance from Halcyon, and that's Halcyon by Paul Eli Ivy, A Utopian Experiment of Religion and Science. I'm going to read a few quotes from this book tonight, but one of the things that we can say about Halcyon is it had some major theosophical figures and members, and it was heavy on the artistic side, and it had the master Hilarion as its kind of main deity overseeing proceedings, which gave it a heavy emphasis around arts and sciences. But the scientific ray that Hilarion had with him in theosophical terms gives us the very, very deep scientific edge. And what happens is when we come out of that group, we see the Varian brothers, who will be the literal foundation of Silicon Valley. And these guys are going to move deeply into...
there's stuff all around us, and, justice, it's just for us, not for you guys out there, not for the 99%. Only 1%, just us. Right? Anyway. Anyway, I'm gonna go. I might come back up later this afternoon. Maybe not. Maybe. But I hope you enjoyed this one.